Imagine this. Your flight is ended, it's over. You're going about your business on a plane when you open an overhead locker and the face of a deceased colleague is staring back at you. Pretty creepy. Yes, extremely. But this has nothing to do with creepy. This is like, oh my god, someone's been murdered on this plane, one of my colleagues, and someone has him stuffed in an overhead locker. Also, those overhead lockers are not exactly giant. How do they squeeze him in there? What's he doing stuffed in there with all the bags and suitcases? Would you ever open anything ever again? This is a detail that really struck with me while reading about Flight 401. It will probably be at the back of my mind the next time I fly somewhere, but so will most of the details about this case. Anything involving plane crashes always calls for concern. And yes, another episode about planes. But this one has a ghostly twist. The frustrating circumstances surrounding the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 on December 29, 1972, involved a brand new, super fancy Lockheed L-1011 TriStar flying from New York to Miami. When a problem with the landing gear caused it to abort a landing approach and circle around the Everglades until the problem was sorted out. And that's when things quickly spiraled. After circling for a little while, the plane started descending and eventually crashed into the swamplands. There were 176 people on board, with 101 dying immediately or shortly after, due to the injuries, and 75 people managing to survive. We're going into the circumstances of the crash because, quite frankly, it's pretty interesting, albeit frustrating, and it's clear that this particular crash was definitely avoidable. I mean, aren't all plane crashes somewhat avoidable? Because it's always like, oh yeah, there was an error in this, or pilot error, or whatever you want to call it. And the whole point of the plane crash investigation afterwards is to find out what the error was, and then make sure it doesn't happen again. I think I've mentioned this book plenty of times in other episodes, but Black Box Thinking by Matthew, I know I'm butchering his name, Said, is an amazing book all about this and how the airline industry basically became enormously safe because of air crash investigations and stuff. And it's actually a good book. So, who do we have in the cockpit for this ill-fated flight? Heading up the crew is Captain Bob Loft. His name was Robert, but I think we'll call him Bob. He was a seasoned pilot, well known and liked by his colleagues at the airline. Helping him out on the flight were First Officer Albert Stockstill, which is a great last name, but it makes me think he must have felt the need to move all the time. Are you standing here, Stockstill? And carrying on the decent name streak was Flight Engineer Don Repo. Ah yes, the Repo Man. I'm sure people called him that. I checked the record, but I didn't see it mentioned anywhere while searching. Along for the ride to Miami, but officially off duty, was Technical Officer Angelo Donadeo. Between them, these men had over 50,000 hours of flying time experience, so you would think the plane would be in good hands. Well, you would be wrong. What's that movie with Denzel Washington where he's a seasoned pilot or whatever and he just keeps having a nap because he's messed up? Then he flies the plane upside down because, yeah, that's realistic. We are inverted. I repeat, inverted. As mentioned a minute ago, the plane they were flying was a new addition to the fleet, a wide-body TriStar airliner. It was advertised as the plane that pampers people. It had more spaced-out seating, a galley below the main level, and even bragged that suits can be hung in center division compartments, which I suppose was more of a concern in the 70s than it is now with people traveling in their pajamas. People back in the day, you look at old photos of people flying in their own suits. I mean, how is that not uncomfortable? Like, yeah, because flying was really expensive, people got dressed up. Anyways, it should be noted, no, it will be right now, but even with all those many thousands of hours clocked by the flight crew, this plane had only been introduced in August of that year. So Captain Bob had less than 300 hours of experience with the Lockheed L-1011. Stockstill barely had any more, and Repo had only 53 hours of hands-on flying time in the aircraft. Well, this is completely reasonable because it's a brand new aircraft. And obviously that makes it more dangerous. Like that 737 MAX where two planes crashed in a year because of technical problems. Holy Boeing. Didn't they get some massive settlements, as they should, because one, they deserve it, and two, Boeing should be punished for that screw-up. Well, I'm sure all the previous flying experience would make the transition to a new plane easy. This particular model had different autopilot features than earlier planes, some of which were confusing enough that pilots had to be instructed to either have the autopilot fully on or just turn it off. So as Flight 401 was cruising towards Miami, the captain lowered the landing gear. But the light that showed nose gear was down and locked into position did not illuminate. This was not a major worry for Captain Loft. He retracted the gear and lowered it again. But still, the light did not come on. To be on the safe side, the crew informed the control tower that they were having issues confirming the nose gear was down. So the controller told them to climb back to 2,000 feet and circle around. Coincidentally, there was another plane approaching the airport with a similarly reported issue with its landing gear, and preparations were being made for an emergency landing. So not a huge amount of attention was paid to Flight 401. As they flew out of the way and started climbing to 2,000 feet, Don Repo decided to check if the problem was actually with the light itself and not the landing gear. He tested the control panel lights, and sure enough, the square button that was supposed to light up when the landing gear was locked remained dark. Cue Repo trying to get the light out of the panel, and the whole situation bothering the crew enough that Captain Aloft told Stockstill, who was actually flying the plane at the time, what was nearest to the light, to put the plane on autopilot and see if he could try to pull the fixture out. During this time, the flight headed away from Miami and towards the Everglades to go into its holding pattern. Eventually, Stockstill managed to pull the light out of the panel, but no one replaced the bulb or anything. They just tried to jam it back in there. There was a trick to it, though, which Stockstill evidently wasn't aware of, as he managed to get it stuck in an incorrect position. If this fails, try this. If that fails, try that. There's a giant list they have to go through because that's how flying planes works. Captain Aloft finally asked Repo to go and actually have a look with his eyes to see if the landing gear was down. I guess he could go to the bottom of the plane and have a look and see if it's actually down. It's around this time that it's believed the captain accidentally nudged the control column and inadvertently changed the autopilot setting. Repo descended into the belly of the plane through what is known as the hellhole to check if he could see a red line showing if the landing gear was indeed locked. While he was down there, the messing with the light bulb continued. Loft clearly didn't want to risk damaging the new plane by landing with faulty gear when it could easily be checked if it was locked into place. The transcript from the cockpit voice recorder, there was much swearing about the stupid light bulb, with Loft saying, "To hell with this. Go down and see if it's lined up. That's all we care about. Around with that goddamn $27 piece of light equipment we get on this bastard." Stockstill then said, "I don't know what the hell is holding that son of a bitch in. Always something. We could have made schedule." I get the feeling, and this might have been brought up in that Matthew Said book where people get locked into thinking about one thing. There's this plane, and these three dudes who have 50,000 hours of experience flying planes, and I get the feeling they're all worried about this light and all worried about the landing gear, and there's something much more worrying going on, like the autopilot being knocked and them not realizing it. There are crazy examples where people get so busy fixing a light that they don't realize the plane has literally run out of fuel and is going to fall out of the sky. It's just this crazy thing humans do where we get locked into one thing, can't focus on other stuff. Obviously, there are now a lot of procedures in planes to make sure this doesn't happen. Just after this, a 1-second chime sounded, which was meant to alert the crew that their altitude had changed. No one appears to have heard it because they were all focused on the light. The autopilot had descended the aircraft by more than 250 feet past the 2,000-foot setting, and it was still going down. A little after this, Repo pops back up saying that he couldn't see anything down in the hellhole because it was too dark. Loft turned on a light, and Repo went back to the hatch, with off-duty Angelo Donadeo coming to lend a hand. According to Donadeo, Stockstill and Loft were still both trying to pull the light fixture out again. Stockstill was bracing his other hand on the control column. Yeah, that doesn't seem like a good idea. Sorry. It doesn't really. At this point, the controller in Miami noticed that Flight 401 was showing as 900 feet above altitude. But apparently it was common for incorrect readings to show for a few sweeps of the radar before they glitched back to the correct ones. Yeah, that's not comforting to know. It's like, nah, it's fine, I'm sure it's fine, it's just an error. Now it's disappeared from radar, and I'm sure that's fine, it's just a glitch. It's not coming back. It's fine. So he contacted the plane to check on it, but didn't ask anything specific. He just said, "How are things coming along?" Before we pile in and criticize him too much, even doing this was apparently above and beyond the call of duty, as they were primarily concerned with aircraft's location in relation to other aircraft, not how high one plane was flying out in the boondocks. If he had just mentioned their altitude, though, maybe somebody would have looked and seen they were way too low. But nobody did. Loft said they were going to turn to make their approach now, and shortly after this, Stockstill finally noticed that their altitude was way off from what they thought it was. The last recording from the cockpit went like this. Stockstill, "We did something to altitude." Loft, "What?" Stockstill again, "We're still at 2,000 feet, right?" Loft, "Hey, what's happening here? Hey, the altitude. 2,000 feet, right?" Less than 10 seconds later, the plane crashed into the Everglades at 227 miles per hour. They traveled over a third of a mile before finally coming to rest in a myriad of chunks and pieces. Some people died in the crash, others drowned in the marsh, and many suffered burns from the jet fuel. So people actually survived. That's insane. There was also harmful bacteria. They survived the initial crash to drown, which is insane. But some people eventually died of gas, gangrene, and others have limbs amputated. While there was a couple of people in the vicinity who started to help rescue people, the scene was over 13 kilometers or 8 miles from a road, so large-scale rescue efforts took a bit of time to get there. Incredibly, 75 people survived. That's actually unbelievable. Unfortunately, Loft and Stockstill died at the scene, with Repo dying later in the hospital. Angelo survived. I kind of thought if a plane crashes into the ground at 227 miles per hour, that it's game over. For the record, the landing gear was in the correct fixed position, and it was just the light bulb that had burnt out. It's such a waste that while 4 people were messing around with a small light fixture, nobody was actually flying the plane. That other plane was also having issues with its nose gear and ended up landing without incident. It was also later found that Captain Bob Loft had an undiagnosed brain tumor that could have given him issues with his vision. This was apparently not relevant to the crash, so maybe it hadn't begun to affect him yet at the time. This was the largest death toll involving a single aircraft in the United States, which obviously made people pretty nervous about this type of plane going forward. Yeah, I'd be nervous getting on one of those 737 Maxes and be like, you guys fixed this, right? I'm sure now it's going to be one of the safest planes in the sky because it's been torn apart at every level to make sure nothing happens again. Because 2 of them crashed basically within a year of each other. But still, I'd be a little bit nervous. Although probably Flight 401 and not even notice because, I don't know, 737s, you fly on them all the time. It could have been worse though. The softer, marshy terrain helped absorb some of the plane's landing energy upon impact, and the newer, stronger passenger seats no doubt saved a few lives. Also, there were at least 60 people who didn't show up for the flight for whatever reason, meaning the aircraft was significantly under capacity. 60 people didn't show up. Those people would make us think there's some Final Destination stuff going on. It's like, over the next week, 60 people die in mysterious circumstances at fairgrounds. Now the spooky part. Here's where the creepy start of the story comes back. After the crash, people, usually pilots and flight crews, started reporting odd encounters aboard other Lockheed TriStar planes. The vice president of Eastern Airlines was on board a flight from New York when he got chatting to the pilot, but realized the plane was in fact being flown by someone completely different, and the pilot he had seen had disappeared. The man he saw had been Captain Bob Loft. Sounds like that dude needs to get checked for a brain tumor as well. On a flight to Mexico City, a flight attendant was startled to see the face of the deceased Don Repo looking at her from the reflection in an oven door. After she gathered some colleagues to confirm what she was seeing was actually there, Repo warned them about a fire on the plane. When they landed, it was found that one of the 3 engines needed immediate replacement. The plane was flown back for repairs with just the crew on board, but another engine did indeed catch fire, meaning the pilot had to land with only one working engine, which he managed to do. Then comes the incident of the flight attendant opening an overhead locker and seeing Don Repo's face staring back at her. So it was just like a ghost or whatever. It wasn't like someone had actually been murdered in the plane and shoved into a baggage compartment, because that would be more insane than some ghost story. People don't be like, oh my god, I saw a ghost, because ghosts aren't real. Isn't there a movie where someone gets murdered on a plane and they have to solve it and there's an air marshal on the plane or something? I feel like there's probably 6 movies like that because, the 80s exist. There are many other stories of people, usually crew, seeing Don Repo or Captain Loft hanging about on other Lockheed TriStars, usually in the galley or near the cockpit. The specter of Captain Loft was always dressed in his pilot uniform, and he would be sitting or standing, chatting to people before eventually disappearing. Repo would apparently give helpful tips about potential issues with the plane, all of which ended up panning out. This all sounds so real, doesn't it? As the sightings went on, it appeared there was actually a common reason for the ghostly appearances. The Lockheed L-1011 was almost brand new, and after the crash, any salvageable components had been recovered from the crash site and fitted into other aircraft. These included an oven from Flight 401's swished below deck galley and also the elevator between levels. I don't know why, but it's kind of creepy that they'd take parts from a giant plane crash and then install them into other planes. You'd be like, no, where's that oven from? Oh, this is our new oven. Yeah, that's from the one that crashed and all our colleagues died. Really? Eastern, you cheapskates, just get a new oven, please. Eventually, though, Eastern Airlines got wind of all these ghost stories circulating around and decided to put a stop to them. Crew and employees were warned that anyone making reference to the incidents in the flight logs would be subject to disciplinary action. Any previous mentions were either removed from the existing flight logs, or the logs were just replaced with blank versions. The tactic was successful up to a point, but it wasn't until the recovered parts were actually removed from the aircraft that the sightings finally stopped. In 1976, however, John G. Fuller published The Ghost of Flight 401, which brought together all these spooky sightings and accused Eastern Airlines of trying to hush their employees up. I mean, there's a very good reason why they'd hush them up, because these sort of sightings occur because of group hysteria. Someone's like, oh my God, I saw a ghost in that house. That house is haunted. And someone else is like, oh my God, yeah, I saw it too. Then someone else goes into the house and is like, oh, it's definitely in there. Just because one person said it. And if you try to stop people saying it, then you're not going to have these sightings anymore. Because when we think about ghosts logically, that's what it is. Also, they should definitely make sure there's not some fumes leaking into those planes, because they're all happening on the same planes. Maybe just make sure there's no carbon monoxide going on, no weird chemicals, because thinking about this logically, it's the crew, the pilots and staff, who are the ones seeing stuff. They're spending the most time on the plane. So I would think about something, environmental toxin or exposure to something causing hallucinations, especially if passengers aren't seeing them because they're on the planes much less regularly. But I do reckon it's just group hysteria. I will say, I have looked at people and thought I've seen somebody, but it's not really them. It's more, I guess, just my mind messing with me, because I know it's not really them, because it can't be them, because at that time they're wherever they're at, or in another country or something. So maybe you wish it was them, but unfortunately it's not. But while the airline did consider legal action against Fuller, they ultimately decided not to, fearing it would just bring more eyes to the whole situation. Ah yes, aware of the Streisand effect, are we? In 1978, a movie based on the book was released, also called Ghost of Flight 401. It's currently 5.8 on IMDb, but it has Kim Basinger in it, playing someone called Percy Fraser, so who knows? Maybe it'll be worth a watch. Yeah, that's what I thought about that movie. It's so bad. It's like the worst movie I've ever seen. It's kind of like Nicolas Cage's Left Behind. He plays a pilot on a plane and a bunch of people are raptured. The only person who could act in the movie was Nicolas Cage, and it felt like they got Cage as their big lead star so they could put it on the cover. And he's actually starring in the movie, and everyone else is people who didn't quite make it into drama school. It's like, what's going on here? And I'm sure it's also terrible writing and direction, but altogether it was just, oh my God. And I think it actually does quite well on IMDb, because all the religious people are like, it spoke to me, but it was really bad. So that's the story, whether you believe it or not. If you do believe it though, maybe you'll want to end the video now, because we're breaking it all down. Put your seat backs in an upright position, stow your tray tables, and let's get into it. I think this John G. Fuller guy who wrote the book, this often happens. We see it in The Dead Reckoning a lot, where there's a spooky story. We're telling it as if it's definitely real, but it turns out the primary source is the John G. Fuller book. Whoever wrote that book decades later embellished a ton of stuff. Then everyone uses that as the main reference, even though it's allegedly made up. So there are two parts to this story, the super frustrating crash part and the spooky ghost part. One of them was 100% true. Guess which one? Yes, of course, seeing Don Repo's ghostly face in an oven door was stone cold fact. And I just made up the others about a light bulb and an autopilot. Just kidding. Unfortunately, the plane crash part was horribly true, but it did lead to some better safety practices within aviation, such as better processes within the cockpit when problem solving. Mandatory safety harnesses for crew jump seats and making flashlights part of the standard crew safety equipment. These were not fitted to life jackets at the time, and when Flight 401 landed in the dark in the middle of the Everglades swamp, some extra lights to locate people might have saved more lives. This is what I love about aviation. If something goes wrong, they're like, okay, don't talk about it. Medicine is terrible for this. Something goes wrong, don't mention it. There's this term from Matthew Said's book. I can't remember exactly what it was, but in aviation, they're just like, talk about it, make sure we fix it. And that's why aviation is safe. While medical accidents and unforced medical errors kill an extraordinary number of people every year, it's just like, holy medicine, what are you up to? Isn't hospital death from preventable errors one of the major causes of death these days? Which is insane. We should fix that. But back to all the hauntings. I guess it kind of makes sense that parts from the crash plane were fitted into others, and they'd hold the spiritual energy from the disaster, and that's why sightings of repo and loft were on planes with parts from Flight 401. I guess it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't really, does it? I mean, I suppose it could explain why ghosts were seen on certain planes and not others, but when you actually look into it, it makes no sense at all, because none of the crash plane parts were reused in other planes. So we'll put that in your pipe and smoke it. Yeah, that's the thing. I get the feeling that this is something that George or John, whatever dude wrote the book, mentioned, and then everyone took it as fact, even though it's like, no, they didn't do that. That's insane. I felt it was kind of insane while talking about it because don't the parts end up in some giant NTSB warehouse somewhere? And when a plane crashes, the insurance company pays for it anyways. So you don't need to be taking an oven out of a crashed plane and fitting it into another one. What's that burn mark from? Why does it smell funny? Oh, it's part of a plane crash. No one's doing that. That's mental. Flight 401 was largely obliterated with debris spreading out over a large area, and nothing like an oven or elevator was salvageable. And can you imagine the recovery team picking through that nightmare scene like, oh, we've got another one that looks good over here. Just a few dents in it. Stick it in the trunk, we'll reuse it. Imagine the savings. Seems unlikely. Plus, the TriStar was already being rolled out across the airline, and they weren't likely to save an oven from a crashed giant wide-body jet just to put in another one. So that bit of the ghost story is false. So let's now dump on all the other bits. This can be done in one fell swoop by pointing out that none of these stories were circulating around the airline prior to the publication of Fuller's book in 1976, 4 years after the crash. While he stated that all the stories had been told to him personally, he of course either changed people's names or left them vague and anonymous to protect them from retribution from the airline. Yeah, of course he did, mate. There's no real way to verify any of the claims of ghost sightings in his book, and the airline did actually try to do it. Remember how they were thinking of suing Fuller's publisher, but didn't? It wasn't because they were scared to bring this to the public's attention. It's because they didn't want to give him more publicity. This is such a good response. Just don't engage. Be like, shh, don't talk about it. No one's going to buy this book. No one cares. It's just one crackpot dude. Or quietly deny it. No need to sue him. With a spin-off film coming out too, the spooky stories were really just starting to annoy management. Claims that they bullied and harassed staff to keep quiet about supernatural encounters were also a main reason the airline considered legal action. In another book about Eastern Airlines published in 1980 called From the Captain to the Colonel, an Eastern Airlines employee said, quote, "We spent weeks trying to locate anyone who claimed to have seen a ghost. Couldn't find one person." So, could Fuller's claims have been made up? No. Who could have ever predicted this? Who would have known? It seems so. Fuller published quite a few other books, including The Interrupted Journey to Lost Borders, Flying Saucer, Unidentified Flying Objects Over America, The Object of 29 Megacycles, A New Breakthrough in Life After Death. So this sort of tale seemed right up his alley. Again, this is often something we bring up on this channel. If you've got a fiction book, just call it nonfiction. Throw in things that could vaguely be true, and boom, it's going to sell to the wacko conspiracy crowd, or to people who like Dan Brown novels. In researching this story, I've found people asking how you could possibly poo-poo all the examples given, as they seem to believe that they were all from actual witnesses. But here goes. Fuller just made it all up. Sorry about that, folks. Yes, when you rely on one source, how can you discount all the sources? Because they were all made up by one bloody guy, Bloody Fuller. There doesn't seem to be much connecting his book to any sort of real event that happened in the aftermath of the plane crash. No other documented proof for ghost sightings appeared before his book came out, and attempts by the airline to investigate the stories came to nothing. No parts from Flight 401 were reused, and even if they were not subsequently removed from planes to exercise repo and loft. Excuse me. And why would you want? Anyways, they weren't malevolent ghosts. They were just described as being helpful in pointing out problems with the plane or shooting the breeze with people. Who would really complain about that? The only tenuous connection that exists in the related flights to Mexico City were the engines burned out. That part was true. But the flight attendant seeing Don Repo's face in an oven was not. The pilot of that plane is documented in a journal, the Flight Safety Foundation, a few weeks after his experience. When asked about what it was like to land the TriStar with only one engine, he said, "Scary. For a minute, I thought Repo's ghost was on the plane. This is literally the only reference to a ghost on a plane." Or Fuller's book was published. And it's not like he's admitting to seeing the ghost of the dead flight engineer. He was joking. It was a light-hearted comment because he was also recorded as saying it with a laugh. So maybe not the most tactful comment, but not really concrete evidence for Don Repo haunting other TriStars. Honestly, what did he write? 42 megacycles traveling aboard alien spacecraft? Seems that very little was enough for Fuller. Not exactly the pinnacle of journalistic integrity there, Fuller. Thankfully, the haunted Lockheed TriStar seemed to be nothing more than an urban legend, started by a writer with a supernatural leaning and perpetuated by a popular TV movie. The crash of Flight 401 should never have happened, but at least there was a significant number of survivors, and changes were put in place to stop situations like this, where all the crew were distracted at the same time. I'll leave the last word to Colonel Frank Borman, who was the CEO of Eastern Airlines at the time of the crash. He was also a former Apollo astronaut, which is pretty cool. Military, an astronaut, and CEO of a major airline. Respect, mate. Anyways, when asked about the whole situation regarding what was in Fuller's book, Borman said, quote, "The one accurate quote in the book was made by Jim Ashlock when he called the whole story a bunch of crap." So there you go. I think we can safely assume there's enough to worry about when flying through the air without having the ghost of a dead cockpit crew jump scaring us from the luggage rack. Indeed. And this was an episode of the Dead Reckoning Show. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the Dead Reckoning Show. As always, this episode is sponsored by Fastest VPN, one of the easiest ways to protect your privacy online, whether you're streaming your favorite shows, browsing on public Wi-Fi, or just trying to keep your data secure. Fastest VPN has you covered. It delivers fast speeds, strong encryption, and access to content from around the world without slowing you down. Plus, you can use it across multiple devices, so your phone, laptop, and tablet all stay protected. If you want a simple and affordable way to stay safe online, check out Fastest VPN today and start browsing with confidence. And of course, if you want to help the channel grow, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Larry M. Lease. It's buymeacoffee.com/Larry M. Lease. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We will see you on our next episode.